They walked in, said one line, and the studio cracked up. Lenny and Squiggy weren't just side characters, they were chaos wrapped in leather jackets, stealing every scene they touched. Behind the laughter, though, lay a story nobody spoke about. So how did two unknown comics crash their way onto Laverne and Shirley? And why did Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall keep silent about what really happened on that set for so long? The truth involves house party auditions, last-minute rewrites, and behind-the-scenes moments too wild for television. This is the untold story of the twosome who changed sitcom history forever. Origins in a living room, before the cameras, before the catchphrases, before that unforgettable hello that shook the studio walls. Lenny and Squiggy were just two guys cracking jokes at a house party. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall still laughed years later whenever they recalled that night. The whole thing started in Penny's living room. It wasn't an audition, not even close. It was a casual evening, friends dropping by for drinks, the kind of night Penny and her then-husband, Rob Reiner, were known for. They always had people over, actors, writers, comedians, and on that night, two guests stood out, David Lander and Michael McKean. Penny already knew them from The Credibility Gap, a sketch comedy and musical satire group that had built a cult following in the 70s. Their timing, wit, and knack for sharp improv made them the kind of performers you remember instantly. But that night, an unexpected turn of events took over. As the group chatted and laughed, David and Michael suddenly shifted gears. They became Lenny and Squiggy right there in the living room. They didn't need encouragement, Penny later said, grinning at the memory. They just went into it. 1 second, they were themselves. Next, they were two offbeat, lovable goofs, sporting outrageously over-the-top accents and nervous tics, and a chemistry that was impossible to fake. Everyone in the room broke down laughing. The transformation was seamless, spontaneous, and totally unforgettable. Cindy remembered that the characters had an energy that filled the space. They had this rhythm, she said. They'd bounce off each other like they'd been doing it forever. It wasn't just funny, it was electric. Penny saw it too. She didn't need a script to know it worked. What she saw that night was pure comedic instinct. The way they moved, the way they interrupted each other, the way one pause could make an audience erupt. Timing couldn't have been better. Laverne and Shirley was just getting its voice, a lively sitcom about two best friends of the same social class struggling to live independently. The show relied upon Penny and Cindy's chemistry, but Gary Marshall, Penny's brother and the producer, sought something more: the characters who could barge in, stir, and leave the viewers breathless. Thus, Penny made the following suggestion. You have to check these two men out. The next day, David and Michael now found themselves being called to the set. No proper tryouts, no tedious screening, only an opportunity to expose what they were capable of. And when they entered that soundstage, it was a case of déjà vu. They did not just act, they conquered the space. Just as they had done in Penny's living room. No one stopped laughing. They were bizarre, exaggerated, yet completely authentic in their madness. It was like catching lightning in a bottle, said Cindy. They always came, got there, laughs, and left. That was the case every time. The living room act, which was an improvised one. At first, it became a legend of the TV history, but not by accident. It was the combination of instinct and opportunity. Penny had a long list of artists who made her laugh, but very few had the power to bring the whole audience down in the blink of an eye. The same was true with David and Michael. They had the same wonderful and rare gift. They did not pretend to be funny. They were really funny, starting with their posture and ending with how they pronounced their words. Later, Penny would say they were meant to come into a place, deliver a line, and leave as if the place was theirs. That was precisely what Lenny and Squiggy turned into: a dazzling comic storm that could burst into a scene, crack up the audience, and be gone before you could take a breath. And it all started not in a casting call or a writer's room, but in a crowded Los Angeles living room, where two friends slipped into character and changed sitcom history forever. From Anthony to Squiggy when Laverne and Shirley was still new and finding its rhythm, nobody could have guessed that two side characters originally called Lenny and Anthony would become television icons. The plan was simple. Bring in two neighborhood guys who were even more awkward, edgier, raunchier, and more over the top than was Laverne and Shirley. The chemistry was there, the laughs were instant, and audiences couldn't get enough of them. But before the world met Lenny and Squiggy, a decision made behind the scenes flipped everything about who they were supposed to be. According to Penny Marshall, the first version of the characters wasn't supposed to include Squiggy at all. His name was Anthony, an Italian guy from the neighborhood, paired with Lenny in what was meant to be a one-off appearance. It was Lenny and Anthony, Penny explained. But there were too many Italians already. She wasn't exaggerating. Between Phil Foster's Frank DeFazio, Eddie Mecca's Carmine Ragusa, and the whole Italian flavor that was already running through the show, the producers decided they needed something different. So they changed everything. Anthony was out, and Andrew Squigman was born. Same comedy duo, new identity. And with that change, the entire balance of Laverne and Shirley shifted. Squiggy wasn't Italian anymore. He was vaguely German, or maybe Eastern European, depending on the day. What mattered wasn't the nationality, it was the sound. The name Squiggy popped. It was strange, snappy, and just cartoonish enough to stick in your head. It fit perfectly, alongside Lenny's more straightforward, man-on-the-street delivery. That change wasn't merely cosmetic. The rewrite freed the duo to be bigger, broader, and far more unpredictable. Their weirdness wasn't tied to ethnicity or location, it was just who they were. They became the living embodiment of lovable chaos, and the audience could feel it. Penny recalled that the name change was only the beginning. Once they became Lenny and Squiggy, everything clicked. The accents, the posture, the strange speech rhythms, all of it just worked. They had their own world, she said. They'd come in, talk nonsense, make everybody laugh, and leave as if they were off to wreak havoc somewhere else. Obviously, Lenny was also affected by the creative shuffle. His full name was Lenny Kosnowski, and it was meant to sound comical even before he spoke a single word. Penny Marshall made a joke once that Kosnowski meant, "Help, there's a hog in my kitchen," a line that wonderfully captured the ridiculous and lovable aura the pair had all the time around them. Their very names were coined for laughter. One long, heavy syllable coupled with a short, sharp joke. Cindy Williams considered the change a blessing. Then they were Lenny and Squiggy. It just made sense, she said. The moment they entered the set, the audience had already realized they were going to face trouble. The names just made you laugh before the characters even had the chance to utter a word. The same was happening in the background. The shift gave writers more freedom, too. The characters could now hover between the different stories, neighbors, workmates, supporting characters, or disrupting the overall flow. The two were not asked for a reason to arrive. They could just pop in, deliver a well-placed joke, and then disappear like ghosts in blue. Gary Marshall was famous for his stringent timing and structure, and he also recognized the brilliance in it. They enter, get the laugh, and leave, he said. That's money. And that was the extraordinary thing. Amongst the range of hardworking and struggling characters, Lenny and Squiggy were the comic release valves, the odd friends that everyone put up with, for they lightened the atmosphere a little. They were neither intended to be profound nor polished. They were simply to be hilarious, pure, and simple. The audience viewers were already hooked the moment their pilot episodes were broadcast. Anthony was erased from the memory. Squiggy became synonymous with every household. It was strange, it was daring and memorable. What initially was a trivial casting error metamorphosed into one of the most intelligent, artistic shifts in the history of sitcoms. Because once Lenny and Squiggy walked through that door, saying hello, in that unmistakable voice, nobody cared what their names used to be. Gary's Ladder, Comedy Math. When Penny Marshall first brought David Lander and Michael McKean to Gary Marshall, she knew They were funny, but Gary saw something deeper. He didn't just see two goofballs with sharp timing. He saw the missing rung in his comedy ladder. To Gary, every great sitcom worked like a social equation. You needed contrast. Characters higher up the ladder, striving for something better, and characters below them, reminding everyone that it could always be worse. That was Gary's comedy math, and no one calculated it better. He looked at Laverne and Shirley and saw two working-class women trying to climb out of Milwaukee's brewery life. They were dreamers and strugglers, already funny and relatable. But even lovable underdogs needed someone to look down on, someone louder, funnier, and far less put together. That's where Lenny and Squiggy came in. As Gary put it, someone's got to be worse than you. It wasn't an insult, it was architecture. Every straight man required a wild card. For every heartfelt scene, there had to be chaos waiting off stage. Laverne and Shirley were the emotional center, but Lenny and Squiggy were the pressure valves, bursting in at just the right moment to blow the tension sky high. And Gary knew that to break the rules, they had to do it perfectly. That's why Lenny and Squiggy's appearances were short, sharp, and explosive. They were the comedic shockwave, the guys who'd barge into an argument, drop one absurd line, and would make the audience forget they'd just watched a scene about heartbreak or money troubles. The whole purpose was to keep the rhythm going. As Cindy Williams once said, Gary was like a mathematician when it came to laughs, knew where to place the joke, how long to let it land, and when to get out before it was stale. With Lenny and Squiggy, that timing was perfect. The people watching the show were well aware that every time the door opened to let in those two, they certainly would not miss the laughter. It was a very rare expectation, comedy trick that few shows could perform. Nevertheless, Gary's formula was not just about the right timing, it was about the right mix. Laverne and Shirley were not sparkling. They had their flaws and were much akin to real people. Thus, the characters under them had to have great enough stories not to be just sad or pitiful, but to be so ridiculous that the girls, by comparison, would look heroic. Lenny and Squiggy were just the guys for that. Their craziness counterbalanced the disorder of Laverne and Shirley, almost as though they were so organized. The balance achieved gave the show its unique character. Laverne and Shirley were different and special as they mixed female leads with pure slapstick. The story was mainly about the girls, but Lenny and Squiggy made it around them more extensive, more bizarre, and more unpredictable. They represented the notion that in every neighborhood there are oddballs, and that those oddballs are very often the most genuine mirrors of real life. That was Gary's brilliance. The latter worked only if every rung was significant. Without Lenny and Squiggy, Laverne and Shirley could have easily turned out to be just another sitcom revolving around two roommates trying to get love and pay the rent. But they were there, and the whole comic ecosystem, the dreamers, chaos makers, and everyone in between came into being. Not just the actors, but even the creators themselves. Got it. We were the chaos that made their normal look sane, said Michael McKean. We were the bottom of the ladder, but we loved being there. And Gary would not have it any other way. Little did anyone realize that simple formula would lead to one of the most iconic entrances in the history of TV comedy. And it started with two words nobody ever forgot. Hello. The art of the entrance, some TV moments you can hear before you see. And for Laverne and Shirley, it was the creak of a door followed by one perfect word. Hello. The audience would erupt every single time. It didn't matter what the plot was. No matter how emotional the scene had been, or how serious the moment seemed once Lenny and Squiggy appeared. The energy completely shifted. That was the art of the entrance, and no one mastered it like David Lander and Michael McKean. From day one, Gary Marshall drilled into his cast that timing was everything. The pace of Laverne and Shirley was like